All right, you guys, we are super excited to have Kate Courtney here with us. Thank you so much for joining us, Kate.
Thanks for including me. Excited to be here.
Yes, we were just sharing some stories before we hit record, and turns out we grew up somewhat close to each other, and she rode horses right in my neck of the woods. So hopefully that's not one of your two truths and a lie.
Yeah, I know that would I thought about that one, but no,
Yeah.
got a few different ones.
Yes, so I'm sure we passed each other when we were wee tots back in the day. But before our listeners learn too much about you, why don't we dive straight into your two truths and a lie?
Okay, good one. We thought about this a lot today. I had a 5-hour ride with one of my friends, and so I grilled him on what was believable and what was not. Okay,
Plenty
so
of
my
time to
three
brainstorm.
are: I shot a goose for Thanksgiving dinner.
Okay.
I have ridden my bike on every continent,
Oh,
and I gave my mom a cow once for Mother's Day.
are we talking like a real live cow? We're talking like a stuffed cow.
A real cow.
For Mother's Day?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I can't reveal whether that happened or not. They're all very
Uh,
niche, though.
yes, those I have to say we've gotten like the bike on every continent or raced on every continent. Definitely not cows to mothers or gooses for Thanksgiving dinner. Um,
All of them.
I
Hmm.
know. The cow seems kind of, I wonder if you like got your mom a cat or something. Maybe a baby
I could
pig.
see the cow. I don't know. Grew up riding horses.
Maybe it's like one of those things where like you know how you can in a different country you can like what is that? Where you kind of
Yes.
like
Yeah,
yeah,
you like adopt an animal. I've done
yes.
that for my
Maybe
mom.
she did that. Maybe she adopted a cow. Um, but also that seems a little like a stretch. I kind of could see you shooting a goose. I don't know why. I just met you, but I feel like I could see you shooting a goose. Because you're outdoorsy, adventurous. I'm gonna go with the cow as the lie, but what do you think, Amanda?
I I feel stumped, but I'm just gonna go for the goose for Thanksgiving.
Okay.
But
And
I
it's
could
probably going to be like she hasn't biked on every continent, the one we think is the most obvious. Okay, don't tell us the answer.
Can't tell you.
It,
I will
it
reveal
might get
nothing.
revealed throughout our talking to you, but why don't we kind of take it back a ways and kind of let us know like how did you get into cycling? Like what got you excited and on a bike and continuing to get on a bike?
Yeah, so I grew up just down the road from you in Marin County, California, at the base of Mount Tam, which is where mountain biking was like famously founded and where there's an amazing outdoor recreation community. So I grew up hiking and running and riding my bike, and kind of doing a little bit of everything when it came to sports. But I was never really very good, I would say. So I like ski race, I did gymnastics, I ran. And I feel like in high school, I found the competitive side of mountain biking, and it
Mm.
was really like this home for my competitive spirit, and also something that was a good mix of things that I excelled at. So it was technical, it was tactical. There was the physical endurance challenge, but it's also quite anaerobic, and it was just this mix of things that I both loved and felt that I could really compete at. And I think that was what kind of hooked me on the racing side.
That's awesome. And when you were doing cycling in high school, was that through your high school? Did they have a team at the time?
Yeah,
That's
so
awesome.
I ran cross country,
Mm.
and that was my first kind of official high school sport, and was looking for a way to cross train in the spring, and wasn't super excited about running around a track. So I went out for the mountain bike team, and it was me and 5 guys. But I was very valuable to the team because the way that high school mountain biking works is you need a girl to score to win as an overall
Oh,
team.
nice.
So I was
Okay.
kind of heavily recruited by them. They saw
Yes.
that I was good at cross country, and I was
Nice.
definitely supported by that team of boys
That's
in
awesome.
pursuing cycling.
Amazing. So, okay, talking about like the track to or cross country to cycling, and then you mentioned before we hit record that you've been doing some running lately as well. Do you think this is just I've been asking a lot of people this
Yeah.
question. Do you think going from running to cycling is harder or cycling to running is harder?
That's a really good question. I think I would say cycling to running, because I
Mhm.
think there's a lot bigger risk for injury. So
Mhm.
I grew up running cross country, running track in middle school, transitioned to cycling, and there's not a lot of injury risk when you're going in that
Yeah.
direction, and the big engine gives you kind of a head start.
Yeah.
But in the last 3 years, I've started running again, and I
Mhm.
had to ease in so slowly,
Yeah.
do so much PT, and my physical therapist has very much limited my volume over time. I now can do like a normal run, and it's exciting.
Mhm.
But initially I was running like 2 miles at a time just to
Yeah.
make sure that I didn't push too hard, because you have such a developed cardiovascular system, but like all the kind of tissue and tendon strength that you
Yeah.
need for running are not quite there.
Yeah. Yeah. That I'm with you on that one. Did you feel like you noticed anything like aerobically more challenging going from running, trying to move your whole body versus being on a bike that supports your body? You can
Like
coast.
that running's more aerobically challenging.
Yeah, or cardiovascularly challenging.
I think for me, it's been hard to like push hard enough with running,
Mm.
just because I'm so injury and risk
Yeah.
averse with
Yeah.
that. So my kind of like goal in running was to be able to run twice a week with my friend Emily, and we
Yes.
run 3 to 5 miles. And
Yeah.
that was like, that's the mountaintop. Like I don't have a lot of big goals, and I think it's important actually that I don't
Yeah.
have those in running, because
Yeah.
it would be so easy to push too hard and
Yeah.
cause issues.
Yeah.
And we got to keep the main thing the main thing.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great point. So, kind of talking about the training piece of things, I did want to dive into, and having been cycling in competitive cycling since high school, out of curiosity, how do you feel like the training in your sport has evolved over the years? I'm just curious if you think that's evolving, and things that come to mind for me are like more potential strength incorporation, or are you guys getting shorter off seasons? Like, how is that? How do you see that
Yeah,
changing?
that's a really interesting question, because I think it has changed overall, I would say, but also like my personal training obviously
Mm.
evolved a lot from high
Yeah.
school, just even in terms of volume. I
Mm-hmm.
always find it important to remind young athletes that I had 3 rest days a week in high school, and like never really rode more than 15 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So that changed significantly
Yeah.
now as a pro cyclist who's been doing it for 10 years.
Yeah.
But I would say strength is definitely an area where I think the kind of overall approach has evolved a lot in the sport. I actually came from ski racing
Mm-hmm.
in middle school. And to me, strength training was like very much a part of how you trained, because in ski racing, it's very well kind of documented that that's a great way to prepare for winter. And
Mm-hmm.
also you don't have snow year round. So I
Right.
think it was much more accepted that every ski racer had a strength program. And it wasn't the case in cycling. And I think a lot
Mm-hmm.
of that was because of kind of the history of road cycling, where maybe you don't want to have as much upper body strength. And,
Yeah.
Tour de France racers, I think probably now spend more time in the gym, but historically that was not a
Yeah.
huge part of their preparation.
Mm-hmm.
So when I came to mountain biking, I actually brought my ski strength coach, and I was
Cool.
really adamant that I wanted to keep doing strength training,
Mm-hmm.
because it made me feel stronger and more confident on the bike. It made me feel like I had more control. And I also felt there was a huge injury prevention benefit.
Yeah.
And I liked it. I liked
Yeah.
doing it. And so I remember then having a lot of pushback from cycling coaches saying, this is taking away from your preparation on the
Mm-hmm.
bike, you're sore, you're building mass that might not help you.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've definitely seen a huge shift. Now everyone strength trains, and it's a huge
Yeah.
part of preparation for World Cup mountain biking.
Awesome. And so for our listeners, we have listeners from all different types of endurance-based sports. So can you break down for the listeners your sport? What is the terrain like? What's the duration like when you compete? Where are these events that you're competing? Give us the lowdown on the event.
Hey, World Cup mountain biking crash course.
Yeah.
So World Cup races, there's 8 or 9 events a year, similar to kind of ski racing. And at those events, we have two main races. There's the short track on Friday nights, which is relatively new. It started in 2018 at the elite level. And those races are, as advertised, short. They're about 20 minutes in duration, and they involve many laps of a very short course. So it's usually like a 2-minute lap, and you do maybe 10 laps. It's meant to be more tactical and more anaerobic, obviously. And that will determine the start order for Sunday's cross-country event. And that's the main event. That's the Olympic event. And that's the main discipline that I've focused my career on. And it's a mix of uphill and downhill terrain. It's a mix of single track and fire road, although a lot of single track. And it's similar to, I call it like sprinting a marathon. It's a mass start event. And it runs similar to a marathon. You kind of like start on the white line, the first person back across the line an hour and a half roughly later is the winner. And the race consists of about 5 or 6 laps of a 5-kilometer course. And within that, there's technical terrain, there's big climbs, there's steep descents, and it's a very kind of demanding overall race.
That's awesome. That's super helpful. So with going from a Friday night to a potentially Saturday morning event, I have to like, you're going all out full gas to get good placement on Friday. What does nutrition look like leading up to that Friday short track and then the recovery from that in prep for Saturday's event?
That's a very good question. It's usually Friday, Sunday, which is
Friday, Sunday. Okay, that's good.
But I think next year it's supposed to be Saturday, Sunday at a few events. So that's going to be an interesting challenge.
Yes.
To experiment with what works best and also what your priority is. So if you have a really low starting position and your top priority is like really moving up, you might prioritize the Friday night. If you're pretty safe and you have a good start position, you might prioritize Saturday or Sunday. So there's a little bit of strategy in it. I think for me, the biggest thing that I have to manage with those events is caffeine intake, because Fridays short track are pretty late. So those events have often been at 5 p.m., 6 p.m. And that's where, you don't want to be having like 200 milligrams of caffeine at 4 p.m. with a race the next day. So that's something that I've had to manage. But I think realistically, based on the way I train, these events, while extremely demanding, are pretty short. And I think they just don't require that much in terms of calories, like a 20-minute race. You just don't burn through that much.
Right.
If your nutrition is solid and you've been fueling appropriately for the week and you fuel appropriately after that event, you should be fine. And I think the strategy for me really ends up being around sleep, because if I can sleep after the short track, I can recover well. And, we often do 2 days in a row that are hard in training.
Right.
So I think if you can kind of manage that excitement piece of it and that caffeine intake piece, you're in good shape to do well on both days.
That's awesome. And when you going into the longer, you said it's like an hour and a half, the longer event, is that typically earlier in the day or could it be any time of day?
Typically like 11 or 12.
Okay.
For the women, which is
and what's your, you're awake, you're digested. What's your go-to kind of like breakfast or meal on race day morning?
That's a good one. I started working with a nutritionist about 5 or 6, maybe 6 years ago now. And he encouraged me to try the pancake breakfast, which has stuck ever since. I know it's very popular now. It's delicious. It's easy to digest. And it's something I enjoy. I think that's something I focus on a lot, not just with the race day breakfast, but with recovery, with what I'm eating on the bike. Like if you can find things that meet the nutritional needs of your body and that are within the kind of scope of what your nutritionist recommends, but that you also like, I think that's a performance advantage.
Yeah. Awesome. And I had another, we had someone on here that was a triathlon coach and they called it pancake doping.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like,
the power pancakes or the waffles. It's
there
really
you go. The
either
waffles.
way.
Yeah, I love it. And what with your races, those 90-minute ones where there's a couple laps going on there, are you hydrating or fueling at all during those events?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a huge part of the game. I compared it to sprinting a marathon earlier. So
Mhm.
it's a highly anaerobic sport, which means that you're just burning through a lot of carbohydrates. And that's something we practice in training, trying to kind of refuel that tank as much as possible so I can stay on the limit the entire
Yeah.
time. And during the actual race, I'll have some strategies around that. So I usually like to kind of overplan those things and have like, okay, I'm going to have this on lap 1, this on lap 2, have a spare gel or some spare fuel as well in case
Mhm.
there's an attack or
Yeah.
I feel like I need it.
Mhm.
But we typically have a pretty well thought out fueling plan for those events.
Nice. And do you try and alternate different products at different laps to get variety? Do you feel like you need that, I guess, or are you able to stick with a similar thing throughout?
I typically will stick through a similar thing
Yeah.
throughout. I mean, throughout the course of my career, what that thing is has changed many
Yeah.
different times. I think products have gotten better, but also I do think there's something to be said for if you use a fuel, like even a
Mhm.
particular gel flavor or a brand for an entire season, like sometimes you just get tired of it and it
Yeah.
loses its power to motivate
Yeah.
you. So mixing it up can be really helpful, but
Mhm.
typically within a given race, I've kind of like been testing or using something specific, and
Yeah.
I have a pretty good stomach with those things too. So I'm lucky
Mhm.
in that sense.
That's good. That's helpful to have the strong stomach, the iron stomach. And do you, with that type of event, you mentioned the gels, but also I'm imagining like the terrain and timing of intake is probably well thought out in advance of when there's a stretch of course where you know you could potentially get nutrition in because you're not both hands on the handlebars trying to navigate a boulder or something like that. What is that
Absolutely.
process like?
Yeah, for me, I really think about that a lot in pre-ride. And I
Mhm.
found that the greater specificity I can bring into my plan, the better I'm able to execute it.
Yeah.
So even with drinking, I'll kind of like fill my bottles with like a little bit more than I need, but
Hmm.
pretty close to exactly what I'm supposed to drink. And I know
Yeah.
like, okay, I take this bottle in this lap, I need to drink this bottle.
Mhm.
But usually that's not enough to get
Yeah.
me to drink it. It needs to be like, I'm going to have a sip of water when I get the bottle, and
Hmm.
then during this straightaway, and then in this section. And
Yeah.
I'll kind of identify those spots. And I found one that's really helpful mentally because you like know that's coming up, you
Yeah.
execute on that, it gives you something to focus on. And then also, yeah, it reduces the amount of thinking that you have to do outside of that point in the race.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. And with those races, are you shooting for a certain kind of like carbohydrate goal per lap, per hour? What is that thought process like for you, or have you found works best for those events?
Yeah, I run those pretty hot. Like I try to get in almost like as much as you can.
Hmm.
Usually like 90 grams of carbs an hour. And I
Nice.
can handle that with my stomach and
That's great.
feel good when I'm able to do that. And a lot of times we'll have a pretty aggressive strategy from the beginning.
Hmm.
And that's sometimes hard because these races start pretty hard.
Yeah.
But I always find that for me, if I can really focus on that in the first few laps, if you skip a feed or skip a gel on the last lap,
Hmm.
usually you've got enough in the tank
Yeah.
to account for that. And that's where, the race dynamics really come into play. So in the first
Hmm.
few laps, the feed zone, the execution of that plan is really a focus. And then
Hmm.
if I've done my job right, I should have some buffer. So if there's an attack, if there's a strategic opportunity to kind of like go hard through the feed
Yeah.
zone or go
Yeah.
hard through the start finish and not take a jaw in the last lap,
Mm.
I'm able to do that.
Awesome. And yeah, that makes me think too, like how do you mentally handle situations where you're like, oh my gosh, I just dropped my gel, or oh my gosh, I just dropped my bottle, or does that not happen?
It definitely happens. Yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely happens. I think that's part of why we run like a pretty aggressive
Yeah.
fueling strategy. So like you should
Stay
be
ahead of
okay.
it. Yeah.
It's not that long of a race.
Yeah.
And I also think that's where pushing and training helps. Because if you are pushing regularly, in your structured training.
Mhm.
You've had off days. You've had days where you didn't sleep well. You've had days where you had a 5-hour ride yesterday and VO2s today, or you did a strength workout and your legs are sore. And I think, you know, my coach talks a lot about, we have intensity training where it's meant, okay, we like rest into it and we want to get the numbers as high as possible. Like we want to go as far as we can in this workout. But we also do a lot of what he calls adversity training, or diversity training, where the stimulus is a bit different. So maybe it's, you've done these intervals, you did them at a certain power, now do them at the end of a 4-hour ride, or do them on dirt, or do them on single track. And I think that's really been a helpful thing this year. And I'm excited to see how that translates into training or into racing.
Yeah.
Because I think you kind of store this mental strength of, okay, I know that I'm not dependent on a particular environment to perform well.
Yeah. That's great. I love that. We, Amanda, do you remember who we had on recently? They were talking about their training and they were talking about the mental focus in their training. I forget if it was a coach. It might have been Natasha from the
Oh,
the triathlon coach.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were talking about the mental prep as well as part of their programming. And, I think that's so important. Like, if you really hone in on like what the goal is of that training and then focus on that. And I mean, definitely too, I mean, you mentioned the events being 90 minutes is one piece of the puzzle. And then I think with athletes too, they're out on a gravel bike for like 12 hours. It's like, then there's also that kind of mental goodness. You know, aspect that has to go into that as well. But yeah, I think that is the mental piece is something that I think is starting to get a little bit more attention, I think as deserved, which is great. And the diversity training, that's smart. Get the exposure in the wind, in the headwind, in the rain, and yeah. Then
all
you
the
come to
above.
race day and it's sunny and nice tacky dirt and it feels hopefully easy. That's awesome. So I did want to dive into a little bit about your 2023 season. I know I love your candidness with when you crash. Like you don't see
Oh.
I just respect it so much because it's like we all crash and you just post it right out there on the gram and
Yeah.
take
I don't
it
know
and
why, but I was talking to someone about this the other day. I think like every time I crash, it's been on video, which I find is very funny. Like a lot of
gosh.
athletes will crash in pre-ride and it's like it never happened. Like
Oh,
every time there's like a high production quality asset
oh no.
after a hilariously embarrassing.
Yeah. Well,
But
I'm glad like you're obviously well, but I know you had a crash in at least one that I was aware of in 2023. Can you tell us a little bit about that and I mean, what happened and how you kind of like recovered a bit from that or how you if you needed to recover much?
yeah, I think the last few races of the season did not go especially well,
Shoot,
which
yeah.
just sometimes happens. It's
Yeah.
like, you know, sometimes the stars align and things break in your favor. And I'm
Mm,
an athlete who's lucky enough to have experienced that and had good luck and good days on big
mhm.
days. And I think the bad luck or bad days also helps you to appreciate like all of these factors that play
Yeah.
into an elite level performance. And I think over time, I've gotten better at letting go of those days where,
Mhm.
you know, once something goes wrong, it's just very clear. It's not going to be
Yeah.
like your best performance ever. In snowshoe, I had that big crash and
Yeah.
actually was feeling great and like really was excited about what might have been possible that day.
Yeah.
But, you know, just like made a little mistake and there we go. Ended up on my face.
Mm,
Kind of like collected myself to the best of my ability and really fought hard on the climbing sections of that course and
yeah.
managed to like sneak back into the top 20 and
Nice.
feel like I finished fighting and have, you know, hit some power goals that no one except my coach knows about. But like it wasn't a great experience, I would say, but it
Yeah.
was one where I was left feeling very proud of my effort.
Yeah.
And I think it's important on those days to assess the situation and see what the best way to end the day feeling proud of your effort is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's a huge like mental kudos to you. I mean, some people might just like be like, oh, and like, I mean, I'm sure you've seen it. People will just like throw their bike because they're so pissed and then, you know, and then the day's over. But you got that mental strength. You brush yourself off and you get going. Did you end up getting a concussion at all with that one?
I didn't have a
No, okay.
concussion for that one. I mean, I landed on my face, which can absolutely cause a concussion, but
Yeah,
in this case, like did not take enough of the force.
good.
But like I for sure did not ride well after
Mm,
that. I think
yeah,
I kind of just had a really hard time getting my nervous system like out of that crash mode.
yeah.
And it certainly affected the next weekend as well. So
Mm,
I think in that case, it was good that I kept going. It was good that I finished the race, but I
yeah,
also think it's important to put out there that it's not always the best decision to do that.
yeah,
And I've had enough experience with head injuries that I was pretty, certain in that scenario that
yeah,
I was okay to continue. But I've had other scenarios where I've continued and ended up having a concussion or having a more serious injury.
yeah,
And in those cases, wished I maybe had been pulled out of the race or pulled out of the race myself.
yeah,
And I actually have pulled out of races where I've had concussions as well. So it's
yeah,
not always the best just to push through.
yeah.
It certainly is something that's very case dependent.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. In your career of racing and training, injury wise, have there been, I mean, you mentioned before, I think we hit record, you said a broken wrist. Was it an actual broken wrist that Emily diagnosed, or was it?
Yeah, we were talking about my friend Emily Krause, who's
Yeah.
an amazing doctor,
Yes.
women's sports med at Stanford.
Yeah.
But I
Qualified.
broke it was my ulna, like wrist
Oh.
bone in your
Oh
arm.
shoot.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so I ended up, it was in Nova Mesto, and I crashed and I broke my arm and I broke my brake lever, and it was like a 2-minute
Oh,
fix. And it was a bummer. I was like in second
yeah.
place when that happened. And
Oh,
I ended up continuing on, and I think through
wow.
like adrenaline and also a little bit of frustration, finished that race. And then,
Wow.
it hurt, but I just like wasn't paying quite enough attention to it. And turns out I maybe should have.
Yeah. Oh man. So what was that kind of like recovery process like? Did you change diet or I mean, were you braced up and casted
Yeah,
or
I was
anything?
braced up. I continued riding. I think honestly that was in a period of time where I was probably could have maybe used the rest at that time, but instead use it as an opportunity to train a lot, which
Yeah.
didn't necessarily help me in the long run. But the broken wrist was not that big of a deal, or
Yeah.
arm, I guess.
That's good. That's good. And we do talk a lot about supplement use with some of our endurance athletes. And I was curious with whether it's for injury support, post-concussion, or even just from a performance perspective or vitamins. Is there anything that you feel like has been beneficial or that whether it's certain use during certain times of the year or just in general for immune health or things like that you have found helpful?
Absolutely. So we work with a company in Switzerland that does customized micronutrient supplements for our team, which is
Oh,
super cool. So they do blood tests, and then we get some of the supplements
awesome.
custom made every like 3 to 6 months. And then
Amazing.
I do a few things on top of that or aside
Hmm.
from that I've done for a longer period in my
Yeah.
career. One of the big ones is iron. So I've taken a Proferrin supplement
Hmm.
for like 4 years. I
Yeah.
had never had iron that was like lower than the normal range, but it was on the lower end of the normal range. And that's
Yeah.
something we monitor pretty quickly or
Hmm.
pretty closely,
Yeah.
and try to fix pretty quickly. If my training load seems to be off and my
Yeah.
iron seems to be low, that's a great sign that, something's off balance there. But I take that supplement every day
Nice.
regardless, because
Yeah.
it's helped me maintain that healthy range. Aside from that, I take a really great probiotic that's from Stanford Stanford lab that they developed in the last few years. It's called
Oh,
Live Cap, and that
okay.
I'm a big fan of.
Nice.
Um, and that's pretty much it. I take
Yeah.
beta alanine in season,
Yeah.
and yeah, occasionally some like HMB or
Yeah.
BCAAs, but like
Yeah.
nothing really crazy outside of that.
Yeah. Have you ever played around with the sodium bicarb out of
I
curiosity?
have. I actually love that stuff.
Oh,
Yeah, I
cool.
tried it
Awesome.
last year.
Yeah.
Morton. I mean,
That's
in
great.
general, I try not to like have too many supplements to
Yeah.
manage. I think first of all, it can be distracting.
Yeah.
Second of all, it is important to acknowledge like I'm on the anti-doping list. I get drug
Yeah.
tested quite a lot, and I do not want to take anything that's going to cause a problem in
Yes.
any way. Something like Proferin, it's like,
Mhm.
I need to take that to maintain a healthy
Right.
body while I'm pushing in this way.
Mhm.
But I like to be pretty selective
Mhm.
outside of that. So bicarbonate is something I'll do. Beta alanine is something I'll do. But I definitely want to make sure that if I'm doing those things, I like notice a benefit. I feel better, stronger. I'm able to recover better. And that they're just like really supporting my training and my overall health.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's cool that your team does the lab testing and then the essentially like prescriptive micronutrients. That's really fantastic. That's
Yeah.
a great, and I imagine they just do that for your team, or can people look them up? Do you
I
know?
think it's called HCK.
Okay,
I believe they do it as a commercial
cool.
product, but probably
We'll
in
have to,
Switzerland. So I don't know
yeah.
about our American
Yeah, for
followers here,
American
but
listeners.
yeah, I mean, my
We,
biggest recommendation is always just to take a blood test and
yeah.
use that as a reference point. And I make sure I use athlete blood test, and we
Oh,
do
yeah.
blood tests at the beginning of kind of we do quarterly blood tests, I would say.
Great.
Um,
Yeah.
and when something's a little low, like my vitamin D was a little low on my last blood
Hmm.
test, and we up the dose. And
Yeah.
that is something that's so easy to do and proactive. And
Yeah.
then I think it also puts that intention behind the supplements you're taking, because I think
Hmm.
there is a lot of information and a lot of supplements that reduce inflammation, do this, do that. And you can really get down a rabbit hole
Oh,
and
yeah.
lose the plot a little bit. Whereas for me, when I'm taking anything, when I'm putting anything in my body, I want to know why and
Yeah.
what the purpose is, and that it's safe and legal and fair.
Yeah.
And that's a great example. My vitamin D is low. I take the supplement. My vitamin D is in range. We maybe titrate it off again, but
Mhm.
like are really keeping my body in those healthy ranges for optimal performance.
Yeah, that's awesome. And with the beta alanine, how do you approach that? Do you do like dosing wise? Is it like for a week before an event? Do you do the 10-week load? Like,
We
because I
do
know
the
it could be a lot.
loading. So
Yeah.
we start, it's maybe like, I can't remember if it's 30 or 60 days out from the first big
Mm.
event. My nutritionist manages this really closely for me, which is also
Yeah.
great. Where he'll be like,
I'll do mine.
okay, it's time. Let's get back on that.
Yes, that's
Um,
good.
but yeah, we do the loading, and then often I'll take it through the spring races and then take a little
Mhm.
break and then
Nice.
start again
Yeah,
through the second half of the season.
that's awesome. Yeah, beta alanine seems to be one that it's like, I don't know, kind of making a comeback. I feel like it just like wasn't talked, and creatine too. Like I feel like both of those weren't really talked about as much, but they're like two of the most studied outside of caffeine, like ergogenic supplements in sport. And yeah, they're starting to come back, which is good. Well, the people use the right ones, like you're saying, and are third party verified and clean of banned
I always
substances,
give the
all the
caveat. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Choose
Be
the proper
careful.
ones. Okay, so I do want to be mindful of your time, but I'd love to hear from you what your future goals are for this year, 2024.
Yeah, it's an exciting one. It's an Olympic year. I'm sure that's top of mind for everyone.
Yeah.
But for me, it's also a big year. I changed coaches this
Oh,
year.
wow,
So I
yeah.
worked with the same coach for 7 years.
Oh,
Had
wow.
a lot of success and like loved working together, but I think it was really time for a change. And
Yeah.
I've been super excited about that. So I think for me, that's really oriented me back towards a lot of process goals, which I think is a great way to feel heading into the season.
Hmm.
And we've got a lot of work to do. So it's an exciting one.
That is exciting. And can you share a little bit about, I know you are involved in, is it the She Sends mountain bike?
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
tell us a
So
little bit
that,
about
I
that?
mean, that is also my word of the year is send it for
I like
just,
it.
or maybe just send. I don't know. Can it be 2 words?
Yeah.
I always have a word of the year, but yeah, I think
Awesome.
for me, this year is all about both sending it in terms of my athletic goals and work with this new coach, but also in my work off the bike and my desire to contribute and give back to the sport that has
Mm.
given so much to me. So I launched my foundation in the fall this year, and it's called She Sends Mountain Bike Foundation. And basically, the She Sends Foundation is aiming to connect, support, and inspire women and girls through mountain biking. And we yeah, kicked it off with a few grants. We did like some limited run of swag, and we'll
Fun.
hopefully be announcing some exciting things in the coming year.
Cool. And are you guys do you do and run any whether it's like mountain bike classes or group rides or anything like that through it?
So primarily it will be like a funding mechanism for
Okay.
those grassroots events. So part of
Nice.
the goal is to really like create connection within the mountain bike community,
Yeah.
have a really fun brand for women to rally around, and then also like fund a lot of these organizations that are already doing this work, that are
Yeah.
running ride programs and getting these girls groups together. Programs like Naked Grit, or
Mm-hmm.
we already did a gift to the NorCal Grit program and to
Nice.
Little Bella's for a specific program there. So that's really the goal. I think I'm hoping to be like a small hinge that swings a big door in the women's mountain bike community, where I just am really honored to be able to kind of help in some way,
Yeah.
knowing that a lot of people are already doing this work in a really powerful way.
That's awesome. I love it. And let's see, we did have some listener questions. So I want to make sure if we already answered some of them. One of them was the talking about the she sends. Favorite pre-race dinner?
Ooh, probably like salmon and risotto.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah,
Yummy.
I was gonna say salmon and rice, which is like rice and veggies are
Yeah.
the workhorse of the mountain bike kitchen. But
Awesome. Someone asked, what was your, this one could be kind of long, so feel free if you want to keep it brief. Overall experience, like, what was your overall experience like at the Olympics?
um,
Too long. We
yeah,
could save it for
I'm
another
like,
podcast.
that's a big one.
That's a big one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was interesting for me. I mean, it was a really unique experience. I think it's, of course, like such an incredible honor to make that team and be
Yeah.
able to represent your country, and was a lifelong dream of mine. It was a complicated experience in some ways due to
Mhm.
COVID. So
Yeah.
I was one of the athletes who, I won the World Cup overall and automatically qualified the year before. So it was
Mhm.
really in the media and busy heading into that Olympic year, and then kind of had to do that cycle twice,
Oh
which I think
man.
was pretty exhausting and
Yeah.
challenging for me.
Yeah.
And then it was the COVID Olympics. So I think it's one of those things. It didn't have a lot of those kind of hallmark features of the Olympic experience, like in the village and with the opening
Mm.
ceremonies. And I think that's a little bit of a bummer,
Yeah.
but I also think it will be a very cool story to like tell your grandchildren about someday. The Olympics
Yes.
that was moved and had a lot of restrictions.
Yes. Yeah. Historical event. You were involved
It
in a
really
historical
was.
event. Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's crazy.
I value that experience.
Yeah. That's awesome. Okay. So we'll go back to your two truths and a lie and get
Okay.
those revealed. So we had here that you shot a goose for Thanksgiving dinner.
Okay.
You've biked on every continent and you gave your mom a cow for Mother's Day.
I have not biked on Antarctica.
Oh, yes, of
Gotcha.
course. Of
Yeah,
course.
I try to pick pretty eclectic ones.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I do a little bit of up like waterfowl hunting with my husband, and
Wow.
that's been actually a cool part of this year. And I felt like it was appropriate for a nutrition podcast because that's obviously going to
Caught you
be
at dinner.
yeah. Well, it really is like the best meat that you can eat if you're going
Mm,
to eat.
yeah.
And then I worked on the dairy in middle school. So I like would
Oh.
ride my horse and like work on this dairy, and they had like a 4-H program where you could adopt a cow. So I gave a baby cow to my mom. I like adopted a cow for her.
Oh.
So
That's awesome.
the
Okay.
weirdest present I ever got her.
Yeah. So we're kind of onto something with the cow
Yeah. It's
adoption.
like flowers are fine next year.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the Antarctica, that would make sense.
Maybe I
That's good.
have to get down there someday.
Yeah. How was the goose for Thanksgiving?
It's great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
it's really, yeah. Especially like if you are hunting in an area where the animals are wild and
Yeah.
eating a really diverse, good diet, like it's just really high quality and
Yeah.
delicious meat. And it's sad in a lot of ways, as eating meat should be.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's also really gratifying in some ways to like be able to go out and yeah,
Yes.
put dinner on the table.
Yeah,
Knowing where food comes from. I mean,
exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just need to learn to gather a little bit better, and then I can Have the full package.
Yeah, get a garden in your backyard and you can gather if you can keep things alive. Okay,
I
this
know,
is
not the gardening phase of life. I think
yeah.
that's post bike racing.
Yeah, it does take quite a bit of time. Well, this has been so fun chatting with you and getting the lowdown. Where can people find you, follow you, all that fun stuff?
Yeah, it's Kate plus Fate on Instagram is probably the best place, and other links can be found there. And then She Sends MTB is the foundation Instagram.
Awesome. And do you have a website? Is it She
It's
Sends as well?
katecourtney.com. And
All
the
right.
She Sends website is shesends.it.
Okay, I like it. I like it. The website names are hard to get these days, so you gotta
Yeah.
do
It's
what you
like, we're
can.
making this in Italy. She sends it.
Yeah. Amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Kate Courtney. This has been amazing.
Thank you.